Chapter 5 Bread. If I had bread, Jerry complained that morning, then I believe I could eat. The young ones stared at her, avoiding each other's eyes. They had known for a long time that their mother was tottery, with one foot in the grave. What they didn't know was that her sense was failing. Never had she talked queer before. It was a sign her other foot was shuffling mighty close to the berry hole. "Look, Saird, she got bread now and ain't teched it yet," Wyatt said, pointing to what Jerry held in her hand. Even Sayward had to think a minute what her mother meant. Then she recollected that it started back in Pennsylvania. One of the times the meal bag had been empty. The young ones were tired of meat. They had cried for a change. They wanted Johnny cake and mush. Now Indian meal was something unhandy to get hold of in the woods, Jerry told them, but if they were tired of meat, they could eat bread for a while. Bread was better than Johnny cake or mush, everybody knew. That opened the young ones' eyes. So they had bread. Jerry called on Worth to swear to it, and he nodded his head shortly. Now bread, she told them, was venison, turkey, and such. Only the dark flesh of bear, coon, and such was meat. Bread was lighter and went in the blood easier than meat, and from now on she wanted to hear them calling things by their right names. Bread, bread, and meat, meat. Even Worth had to say bread for venison, though for a while the word stuck in his throat, and now the young ones had grown so used to seeing bread on their mother's trencher, they thought her weak in the head to be calling for bread and standing there with an untouched turkey wing in her hand. What the young ones didn't know, Sayward told herself, wouldn't hurt them, but this was something too good for Jenny to pass by. Sayward could hear her now, up in the limbs of the hung elm, with the younger ones still as possums around her. Jenny had a knowing mind, and now she was telling them the bread their mother hankered for wasn't turkey or venison. No, turkey and venison weren't bread at all. Their mother had made that up. Bread was something settlement people had on their trenchers. It was a little like Johnny cake, only bigger and better. She and Sayward had tasted it when they were little tykes on a Conestoga visit. It made her mouth water now just to mind it. All the others' mouths were watering too. They spat to the ground lushly with Jenny. "Jenny, go on," they told her, but all Jenny could tell them was that once on a time a chit of a girl had sat up to a shaved board table. She was pretty as a settlement lady, tricked out in her white church gown and neat's leather shoes made over a cobbler's last, and in her hands was a big piece of bread, white as gray moose milk. Sayward moved away. You wouldn't reckon, she told herself, that pretty girl as a settlement lady had been their mother. Not to look at her now, puttering around this cabin in her old walnut short gown that hadn't been washed since Jenny's fingers had taken it in again. and still it liked to fall off Jerry's bones. Oh, her mother's days were numbered. The slow fever burned off mortal flesh like a fire-cooked meat off a bone. All day it never let you rest. Jerry had 4 stout girls to do all the cabin chores, and yet her bare feet kept scraping over the earthen floor that had been damped and tamped and topped with white clay to match the daubing on the chinking. Talking did no good. It went in Jerry's one ear and out the other. Her hair kept sliding down the side or back of her head, coming apart like a hanging bird's nest in December. It made her look like she was in her second childhood, and her mother only 36 or 7. "I'd thin it out, ma'am," Sayward told her. "It's a mortal weight to lug around. Hair can suck your strength like a bloodsucker." But Jerry Luckett wouldn't part with any of her hair, not her. Once her hams had been plump as Asha's and her skin white as Jenny's, and Sayward's breasts were no firmer than hers once were. All she had left that hadn't shriveled up was her hair. When one of the girls tended it of a morning, it swept down from the bench over the earthen floor, heavy as China silk, before it went to the loom. You couldn't find a gray thread. No, she still had her hair, and by Jim's cousin she meant to keep it. "They can't be much wrong with me, or it'd a fell out," Jerry told them, gaunt and jondered. "If I just had some wheat bread, I know I'd pick up." Sayward had been shaving Worth to go to the Shawnee-town trading post. He sat a stool with his head thrown back against the trencher, the sides of his face yellow with soft soap made from game fat and white hickory ashes. Not a word did Worth say, but when Jerry cast up twice that they had no bread, Sayward could feel his face settle into sharp grooves as if the lie had stung him. When he came in from wrenching off the soap at the run, his naked cheeks were flat as a man's who has had enough of a woman's complaining for a while and is glad to be off to the woods. The young ones watched him pull his spring furs from trees and stretchers and work them in a pack with his knee. Jerry came shuffling out. "I want to saying that at you, Worth," she said apologetically. "You got your faults, but nobody can make you out a poor provider. Few has better meat than us. Most times we have venison a-hangin' up. Then you give us special treats, like gad or duck, but a body that's losin' flesh is like one that's a-luggin' a young'un. It hankers for queer victuals." Worth strapped up his pack with wang leather thongs. "I mought be off 5 or 6 nights," he told Sayward. It took no more than a long day, the girl knew, to tramp to Shawneetown, where Ho had a log house, a squaw wife, and goods for the Shawnee and Delaware trade, where Worth aimed to go with his pack of skins. That would keep him 5 or 6 nights. She couldn't make out, unless it might be Bannock's Mill on the Ohio. It came to her the Shawnees once said it took 3 days to go and 3 to come. The same notion must have crossed Jenny's mind, for she bent down and whispered to the younger ones, who licked their chops and pushed up around their father, their eyes bright on him as young coons, their lips shut tight so he wouldn't see their mouths water. "Well, what do you want?" Worth demanded of them. They nudged little Sully, for she was his favorite. "We don't want nothin', pap," she said, pleased as all get out. But before opening her lips, she had to swallow a mouthful of spit. "Get off now before I take a gad to you," he stormed at them. They scattered like a covey of Conestoga field quail, but not very far. Worth came in the cabin and fooled around like there was something he wanted to do or say before he went. Seemed like he couldn't fetch it out, for he looked beat as he went outside, where the hound leaped up and tongued at the sight of powder horn and rifle. "You get back and stay back," he ordered harshly. Young ones, older ones, and sad-eyed hound stood together on the log step or by it, and watched him go down the path. After a little the spice bushes cut off his legs, and he seemed to be just head and shoulders, swimming through the brush. Slowly the great butts of the woods swallowed him up, but for a long while Wyatt held on to the loose neck of the hound, so he wouldn't go after. "Now nary me, nor ma'am, nor any of you young'uns knows where he's a-goin'," Sayward told her sisters and brother. "Maybe he don't know right hisself yet." But that evening, when they were all in bed, she thought she could see her father lying out in the forest, with no more than the shelving back of a rotten log to keep him warm, and the pack of furs under his head for a pillow. And next morning, when gray showed through the oiled paper window light, she had the notion he was up this long time, hunched forward on the trace, making tracks for whatever place he was going. A night or two afterwards she dreamt she saw him sleeping under some strange roof, snug as a mouse in a mill, while a soft dust powdered his buckskins like fine dry snow. Till it was over, she wished he had gone only to Shawneetown. The third evening, Jerry coughed like it was spittle in her windpipe, and when she fetched it out, it was heart's blood. Sayward reckoned it would have filled a wooden cup, but she had no chance to measure. Her mother went to the door and spat it outside, and next morning it looked as if a hunter had cut the throat of a buck there. When the others got up, Jerry said she expected she'd lie abed that day. She made as though nothing had happened, but the face on the pallet was white and waxy as the corpse plants that come up under the beech trees. You could tell by looking at her that had she tried to stand on her feet today, her legs would have buckled under her like wild cherry whips. Sayward didn't look for her father till the 6th day. She was down in the cabin alone with Jerry tonight, for Jenny couldn't stand the sight of blood, and Sayward had sent her up in the loft. The 5th night she heard Sarge get up. His nails rattled across the hard dirt floor to the door, where he growled. Settlement folks claimed the night air was poison, and night swamp air gave you the shakes, But Sayward had left the puncheon door open a crack in the hope that Jerry could catch her breath. The girl reckoned some beast was around, drawn by the firelight shining out in the forest, for it couldn't be Worth. A man would have to own lynx eyes to hold to the trace through the pitch-black woods night. Every step it had branches lying in wait to gouge the eyes out. Then Sarge pushed the door open with his nose, wormed out and bawled like a bell. Sayward lighted a pine splint from the fire and went to the step. Holding the fire above her head, she waited. Up the path something formed itself slowly out of the gloom, and when it floated closer, it was the face of her father. "You all right?" he put to her, meaning the fire at this time of night. "Oh, we're just a middlin' fair," she said in a low tone, holding the light well off so Worth wouldn't see too much at once. She moved ahead to the bed and tucked the cover high over Jerry's neck. Her father could run his knife into any forest beast and watch the red sap run. His hunting shirt was black from the veins of quartered deer he had fetched home on his back, but he wouldn't take it easy to see the dark blots on Jerry's bed gown from what had spilled up out the last days before one of them could catch it. Worth took the candle wood out of her hand and held it over the bed. Always, Sayward reflected, her mother seemed better after she bled. Tonight her face was gentle and the skin fair. Oh, an old body couldn't go back to the cradle again, and yet tonight she had something fresh and mortal sweet about her as a young girl. Many a time had she looked like this when Sayward was just a little tyke. She would sit gentle as a settlement lady on her homemade rocker, listening to Worth, her face slanted down a little, her eyes on the door sill, and a faint smile on her lips. She was that way now, propped up on her pallet. You wouldn't hardly expect that for 2 days and nights she had to be waited on hand and foot. Worth threw the candle wood with a shower of sparks in the fire. His pack of furs was gone, but he let to the floor a tightly woven grain bag that bulged with a soft fat look. From out of his hunting frock he took a bladder that had a thong around his neck. The Miller woman sent Jerry some risin. He said to Sayward, "Next time you can raise with sourdough. Now you better get some on the fire, if you know how." A rattle of chinking boards made him glance up at the hungry faces by the loft hole. "You young'uns get back to bed," he told them shortly. Sayward lifted the bag up to the trencher. It felt mighty heavy. Here was not just a cupful for her mother to taste, but plenty for all. It would last weeks if the Shawnees didn't come around smelling it out. She spilled the gray-white meal soundlessly in the little kettle, hoarding every pinch, feeling of it between her fingers. Not even the fur on the belly of a mink or beaver was soft and velvety as this. They must have run it through a deerskin sifter. Never had she baked wheat bread before, but she well knew how, for the day after her father went she had wormed out of Jerry the way it was done, just in case he came home with meal. Now the girl's firm hands mixed the flour and some water together, working in a little precious salt and maple sugar with the miller woman's yeasty stuff. By the time she set it by the fire to rise, her father had taken off his buckskin leggings that were wet from the fording of streams, and had lain across her and Jenny's bed, some of the quilt over his bare legs, dead as a log from his long tramp. Twice during the night the girl lifted Jerry to ease her sluggish coughing, but Worth did not wake up. Sayward thought her mother felt cooler, as if the fever she had not been free of since the girl could remember had let up. A while before daylight she expected the dough had risen enough. Anyhow, it would have to do. She worked it into small loaves to bake the quicker and set them deep in the hearth, covering them on top and sides with hot ashes and sitting by to keep a slow fire. It was time for daylight when she roused herself from a half-doze. A pleasing smell filled the cabin like a cloud. She scraped the ashes aside. Her small loaves lay round and brown under their grime. She brushed them with a turkey feather and wiped them clean with a greasy rag. When she looked up, her father was standing there clad only in his deerskin hunting frock that came halfway to his knees. He was sniffing hungrily. "You better give her a piece of the crust first," he said, and Sayward saw it fall away, white and beautiful, under the whetted edge of his hunting knife. Up on the loft, the young ones had crawled to the hole and were watching greedily. "It's bread," Worth said, holding the crust under Jerry's nose to smell. Her lips held that faint smile as if he had said, "Here, I got 2 Fisher Fox skins for you." Jerry had always wanted a cape of those mahogany black skins. Never could you get anything finer to prank yourself out in. If a man wanted favor in a girl's eyes, that's what he would try to get for her. But 1 prime Fisher skin was worth 7 buckskins, and a cape of skins would be worth a whole year's kill of deer. "Jerry," Worth said louder, "you said you hankered after wheat bread. Here 'tis." She nodded faintly, but made no move to take it. He broke off a piece and put it between her lips. "Chew it, swaller it down," he coaxed at her, making his own jaws and throat move. He might have been showing how to a babe that had known naught but its mother's milk. Her mouth smiled a little now, as if she understood. Faintly she went through the motions, pressing with her lips and tongue and gulping, but it would not go down. Under her chest bone she started to cough, and while they looked, the white of the bread stained a bright red in her mouth, like somebody had dipped it in wine. Worth's long buckskin-clad arms helped Sayward raise her to let the blood run where it would not choke her again. Under the scraggle of fresh beard, his face was bleak as an old wagoner's trace when black frost had hardened the ruts and hoof marks. The grooves across his cheeks had deepened and his eyes drawn nearly shut, as if here was something they did not want to see. Her father, Sayward thought, could face a bear, even an old she-bear with cubs. He could tramp the woods 3 days going and 3 days coming to give his woman a taste of wheat bread, but this was something it took a woman to stand. When they let her back to the bed, Jerry was light as a pack of dried and brittle fox skins. Through the folds of homespun, Sayward thought she could feel a coldness like stone. After this last bleeding, her mother looked different. Her eyes stared at Worth like he was a stranger in her cabin, and she had never shared her bed with him, or given him 4 hearty girls and a lusty boy, not counting the babe back in Pennsylvania. He turned and went to the open door, and looked out at the black forest where gray daylight was just beginning to come. No use turning your back on this, Sayward wanted to tell him. Whether you looked or no, death would come and life would go. Up in the loft, all signs of the young ones had vanished. Sayward reckoned they were lying face down on their beds. A whole cabin couldn't go to pieces this way, she told herself. No, if her mother couldn't take hold of things now, and her father wouldn't, some person had to. Her voice came out hard to hide her feelings. "Don't you want to come down and see your mam die, Jenny?" she called up to the loft. Like a slow wraith, with her white legs and whiter face, Jenny moved down the ladder. Behind her pushed Asha, dark and mask-faced as a young squaw, in coarse black pigtails and dove-gray bedgown. Last and slowest, holding on to each other when they could, as if it would help, came the 2 youngest, Wyatt, who fumbled, and Sully, who held back now, like the babe of the family she was. She was the only one her mother recognized. A tender look came in the worn-out face. Little Ursula, her lips spelled out, "Don't be afraid. I ain't a-goin' to hurt you now." Their father did not turn from the door. The dying fire flickered on the clumps of herbs Jerry's hands had gathered and hung to the joist, with leatherwood withes for string. There were boneset for fever, and dittany for supper tea, and pennyroyal to purify the blood. They were all dried up and withered now. Never would they stand and wave their leaves in the wind again. For a little while they had bloomed. They had seen a mite of this world. Then their day was done. If death was heading for this cabin, Sayward asked herself, where was death now? Could they see or hear it when it came? Some claimed the wolves and corbies knew death. Once Sayward recollected they had sat in this cabin, cracking walnuts and hickory nuts, while the night dogs howled. All evening they had been bad. Jerry had raised her head. Her mouth was ropey, and her eyes like when one of them had done wrong. "Maybe some Injun a-dyin' in the woods," she said. "Them varmints can smell death furder than a she-creeter in heat." Now, while they waited, Sarge began to growl deep in his old throat. He got to his feet and stood in the middle of the floor. He looked at nothing, but the hair kept raising on the back of his neck. Sayward would give no sign that she saw or heard, but she felt the sweat chill on her body like she stood in a winter wind. Chapter 6. Riddle-de-me. As I was walking down the lane, out of the dead the living came. 4 there were, and 5 to be. Now tell me this riddle, or set me free. Old Riddle. Daylight was running through the trees when Sayward took Jerry's bedgown and short gown out to wash. You hadn't dare wait too long, she told herself, to do something for a body you loved. Here Worth had tramped that long ways after a bag of meal for Jerry, and it turned out that all he could have fetched her was a length of domestic for a lonesome winding sheet. Oh, they could make out without it. She expected ripping these and stitching them together in one piece, but it would not be as pleasing as bought goods. She beat the gowns with a paddle and scrubbed them with soap and sand. Never would her mother rest easy in her berry hole, with her bedgown fit to turn the stomach from lying abed these days. When she came back from the run, Wyatt and Sully were off somewheres. Only Jenny and Asha stayed in the cabin, going about their chores with cruel young faces. The bed was covered over. What lay there might have been no more than a long hump under the quilt, but you couldn't mistake the taint that hung in the cabin and outside, too, if you had a nose sharp as a beast to tell it. Jerry used to tell how back in Pennsylvania they would lay out the dead in a room without a fire, and with the window open, to keep that taint from getting any worse, till men could ride far as they could with news of the burying. One time Jerry was in such a house, when they heard a fearsome screech at night in the room where nobody but the dead was. The men pushed in with candles, and found that snow had drifted in over the box set on sawhorses under the window, and it showed tracks where a bobcat had come in and tramped over the corpse. She shook out the 2 rung knots and hung the washed gowns by the fire. They would have to drip and dry before you could rip them. A living person might put on either one, and its body would warm and dry it by its own self. But never would Jerry as much as warm her bed again. The girl dipped hot water from the big kettle in the little trough Worth had hollowed out from a poplar log. Then, telling Asha and Jenny they could help, she hardened her heart and laid back the cover. Jenny and Asha came slow enough. This was no easy stint for young girls to lay out their mother's body for the bury hole, but whether you liked it or not, death was something you had to go through life with. Plenty times you would meet up with it if you lived long enough, and you might as well get used to it as you could. Not often did Asha open her mouth, but today she talked to hide her feelings. She had run the black haw comb through her mother's matted hair, and it reared up like Jerry was still alive. Did they mind, she said in her low, heavy boy's voice, that Conestoga girl they heard of, who had her hair sheared close against the fever, and when they took her up to move her grave, her hair was grown long and shaggy again, as a winter wolf's. Sayward talked too, but mostly under her breath, to guard her face from showing to her sisters the pity she felt. It was no use sopping her soapy rag so easy. She told herself harshly this wasn't little Sully she was washing. There would be no complaining. Not so, all fired hard. From the body she had to wash all over today. Out in the woods they could hear Worth's homemade mallet whamming the rusty iron head of his frow. He was splitting out chinking boards for a box. That was likely where Wyatt and Sully were. watching him make this thing they hadn't seen before. Down in the settlements, men yoked boards together with pegs the blacksmiths hammered out of iron, but Worth needed only to whittle out oval wooden pens and drive them with the grain in round auger holes, where they would hold a box together so long as the wood lasted. When noon came, they took a long time coming in, for there was Jerry's bread staring them in the face. The way a thing turned out, Sayward thought, was seldom the way you reckoned. Here, less than a week back, the young ones' mouths watered for wheat bread. They couldn't sleep for fear Worth wouldn't fetch meal for it, and now that it was on the table in front of them, they could hardly swallow it down. Mighty soon Worth went back to his mauling, and Jenny to the pillow she was sewing out of fine calico leavings. She would stuff it with feathers, so her mother's head need rest against no hard and splintery chinking boards. It was dark till Worth got his box and lid boards fixed to suit. They had to dig the hole by a shell-bark light. It was dug more with the axe than with the shovel. Worth had hacked and whittled out of a piece of dead oak. The black ground was all roots. As far as their hands went down, the roots lay atop each other, this way and that, thick and thin, like a great den of snakes froze up for the winter, and not knowing it was long spring. Sayward hated having to put her mother in a place like this. Those greedy, flesh-minded roots would slink around that box trying to get in, but what she minded most was Worth pounding the wooden pens through the clapboards on the box after her mother lay inside. He squatted there swinging his battered mallet, and it seemed with every smack he was hitting at Jerry. Oh, he never meant it that way. He had worked all day making as good a box for Jerry as he knew how. Some of the chinking boards stuck out a little from the others, like rib poles over the cabin, but down in the ground it would lay plumb and true. It beat 40 ways the split hollow logs. Some woodsies buried their women and young ones in back from the Janita. It's good as a settlement box, Pap, she told him. Ma'am would be proud could she see it. When he was done, they all lent a hand carrying it over to the white oak. Even little Sully and Wyatt helped, for this was the last thing they could do for their ma'am. They let it down in the ground, with Jerry's feet toward Pennsylvania. Worth had dug the hole east and west, like settlement graves, where so the sun would shine in the faces of the dead when they sat up on resurrection morn. Worth didn't sleep in his and Jerry's bed that night. Likely he was cold, for he took a blanket to break the hardness of the floor and lay by the fire, though it was warm enough for whippoorwills to call. One came so close they could hear it suck the air back in its windpipe. Tonight it kept saying, "Pray for Jerry, pray for Jerry, pray for Jerry." Next morning, Worth looked as if he hadn't slept much. After breakfast, he took down his rifle. "You be all right here for a spell," he said. "I can't see why not," Sayward told him. "We always have been." She knew well enough he was running off. God Almighty had made a man free that way. When things got out of kilter at home, he could take his gun and go to the woods. Maybe Worth would hunt today, and maybe he would make his way to Hugh's post, where it had a man or two like himself to play with the deal's cards. Should he meet some Shawnee or Delaware hunters on the way, they would swap tobacco and hunting tales all day. But a woman had to stay home and mind the big kettle and the little kettle. It wasn't likely she'd get away far as a whoop and a holler till the littlest one, was he son or brother, got big enough to take off by himself, and by that time she'd have forgot all about that mess of troubles and have plenty new ones. But it's no use a cryin', you ain't a man, Sayward told herself calmly. God Almighty done it this way, and you can't change it. She set to work to keep her mind off what it shouldn't fret over. She washed Jerry's quilt and yarn blanket till her fingers got water-parched. It was mighty hard to get that smell of death out. It still hung in the cabin, though she cleaned what she could. Her mother's old broom was worn till it wasn't more than a club, and she cut a green hickory stick, her knife splitting a splint at one end. This she turned back and split another, and another. When she was done and the handle whittled down, she had a fine new broom. Tomorrow or next day she would have to make a little one just like it for Sully. The young ones did their own forgetting. They had been shut up with sickness and death so long. Now nothing was left of that save a grave, and that they could jump over. Oh, today they would make up for lost time. Back by the old Gats each had his own sapling that nobody dared touch but he. They all climbed up at the same time, like treed coons, swinging first one side, then the other, till some would bump and screech. In the afternoon they fixed houses with sticks, and made out they were great folks dressing and undressing inside, pinning together with locust thorns the big sapling leaves of their fine new green gowns and hunting frocks. You could hear them quarreling a long ways off, who was pranked out the seemliest, or if this small stone was a bed or a whortleberry biscuit. Oh, those young ones had as much go as ever they had, but it got worked out in time. For a spell they would rip and tear through the brush, then it would peter out. After a while, if Sayward took a kettle out for water, she would see them wandering up and down the run like they might be looking for someone. Sooner or later, when she was back in the cabin, she could hear them out in front. It was plain they hated to come in, for they would first hang around a long time. Mostly Jenny would take the lead. You couldn't tell anything from her or Asha, and Wyatt wouldn't look to the right or left to show what was on his mind, but little Sully would give it away. Never came she in that door any more without looking hastily from the bed where her ma'am had died. She would scrunch down her shoulders till she passed, and then push a stool around so she needn't look at that bed quilt with the rising sun on it. "What you a-doin', Sardy?" She would fetch out and sit there watching her biggest sister solemn as a hoppy toad. No, you couldn't tell those young ones minded a lick when their ma'am died, but they could feel that something wasn't right around here now. It hadn't so many of them against the woods any more. Never or late had Jerry been the lively one, and yet it wasn't so bright around this cabin like it was once on a time. Worth must have felt it too. He stayed off for longer stretches. Sayward guessed he knew plenty Indian men, with sisters whose black eyes would glitter up at this chance to comfort him, for such looked up to a white man. He was agone and long while this time. The young ones had looked for him back these 2 days. Tonight they said they would stay up and holler fortunes till he came. "This is how you do," Wyatt began to Jenny, who had sang out she was the first. "Are you a-doin' this or me?" Jenny settled him. She went outside, but no further from the door than she had to, for the night was black as thunder. "Go on, Jenny," little Sully prodded her, she being the next. "Hesh up," Asha told her. Jenny stood there, a slight, hopeful body in the shaft of firelight from the cabin. After a while her voice sang out to the dark, silent woods lying all around. "If I am to die a maid, let me hear my grave box made. If I am to wed and sing, let me hear a little bird sing." When she got done, they all waited with big ears. Even Sayward came to the door. The last few nights the whippoorwills had been loud enough to wake the 7 sleepers around the cabin. This night, for some reason, had no more whippoorwills than the day. You could hear nothing but the river over yonder talking to the woods. After a while an air stirred from somewhere, clacking together the leaves a little, and fetching with it a faraway sound like Worth made when he fixed up Jerry's box. 4 or 5 fearsome strokes came slow and clear, then you could hear only the river again. Jenny's face was like tallow when she turned back in the cabin. The others followed quick, for none of them reckoned they wanted to holler for their fortune right now. It was just an old woodpecker, Jenny, Sully comforted her. "Want it, Sardy?" "If a woodpecker ever pecks in the night time, I never heard him," Sayward said grimly, "but whatever mortal thing it was, I wouldn't think no more about it." "It sounded like an axe to me," Wyatt said. They stood mighty still and sober at that. It had no axe nearer than Hugh's post, they all knew, and that was a good day's tramp. Oh, there was no ripping and tearing around now. They stared at each other, feeling for Jenny. Something was hanging over their sister's head. Any day or night it might come on her, the gripes, the cold plague, the bloody flux, or only God knew what. She was the skinniest of the family anyway. Never would she eat enough to keep a lizard alive. Jenny looked behind the door, where at dark Sayward always fetched in the axe. There it stood, its helve smooth and dark from hand sweat. If that whackin' was a axe, she marked her words, it was a-makin' my box. Maybe then you won't go racin' like a white head through the woods, ready to tromp on a copper snake any minute, Sayward told her calmly. After a while she added, "It mought 'a been an Injun down the river. He could be a-cuttin' off shellbark to mend his canoe." A little color fell back in Jenny's face, for this was the time of year when bark would run, but Sayward in her heart knew the sound too heavy for a tomahawk. She got them all in bed soon after and lay down herself with her short gown on. When she woke up It was getting daylight, and Jenny was shaking her. "Can you hear it?" she whispered. Sayward lifted her head. Through a crack in the chinking, she could make out mighty far off a faint hacking. The sound died out during the middle of the day, but came again faintly at nightfall. Early next morning it was loudest of all, and Jenny looked like it was Grandmam Powley's clock ticking off the minutes she had left to live. She wouldn't come in for breakfast. No, she wasn't hungry, she told Asha. Sayward kept going about her business till the morning chores were done. Then she picked up the axe in her strong, quiet hands. "Now that's plagued a body long enough," she said. It was a good thing, she thought, to have an excuse for going off from your cabin. A woman got tired of seeing the same big kettle and little kettle every day, the same gourds and chinking board shelves, feeding the same fire and going down for water to the same run. You wanted to drink water sometimes from some other run. The path down the river was beaten out little more than a deer path, but you could tell the way it ran that no wild beast made this. No, these were human feet. They knew where they were going. A footpath was a pleasing road to travel on, for it came to all things in the woods in time. The rotten log worn through in the middle to let you by, the bed of moss that had brown spots from feet, the sandy runs and cold spring, the narrows where the path clung to the side hill, the hickory flats, the buck laurel, and big whortleberry bushes in the swamp. The path got to all of them in time. Once it even came out at a half-open place on the river where the sun on the water blinded you, and a big old gander snipe waited on his stilts in the shallows. They couldn't hear the whacking when they started, only after they went a ways. The closer they got, the plainer it beat through the woods, making little Sully stick close to her big sister. Now it had almost the ring of blacksmith iron, and now, where the path climbed over a hill, the woods and river bluff below began to answer it. The echoes flew every which way, till you couldn't tell if they had passed it or where the real sound came from. "I told you," Jenny said. Little Sully pulled on Sayward's short gown. "Let's go back and see if Pappy's home, Sardy," she whined. What this thing was, Sayward told herself she didn't know, but too long had she lived in the woods to be scared of owls. She had come so far, her legs had no notion of turning back now. Her naked feet slapped down on the cool path, and on the drifted, curled-up leaves of last year's oak crop. Now they were going downhill, and now they could see something down there on the bottom. It looked yellow and kind of bright through the trees. "You young'uns stay here," Sayward told them. "I want to see that are." To herself she said, plagued if it didn't look like peeled logs, but the young'uns wouldn't stay behind. No, they kept close after her, pulling at her clothes. Something was moving down there, bumping among the tree butts. When it came out, it looked like a forest beast none of them had ever seen before. Then it turned into a gaunt old blue and black spotted ox snaking a log, with a boy no bigger than Wyatt jumping that log first on one side, then on the other behind it. Now who, Sayward thought, would have looked for something like this? The young ones stared like they were beat out, for this was the first white human they had seen since they came in these woods. Oh, they had no notion to turn around and go back home now. Wow, 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 wow. Wyatt greeted that boy defiantly, patting his hand to his mouth like an Indian. Like a shot, the strange boy dropped his gad and jumped behind the back side of his ox that was glad enough to rest his weary bones. A grown man came running out of the woods with a gun and got behind the crib of peeled logs. One look at the musket, and the Luckett young ones scattered like a bunch of squirrels on the far side of the handiest butts. Only Sayward stood calm and half-angered in the path. "Don't draw no bead on us," she called out. "We are nothing to be afraid of. We are neighbors to you." Chapter 7. Maidenhead. So it had white folks livin' in these woods, and they never knew it, Sayward told herself on the way home. A pity Jerry couldn't have lived to see this day. If anything could have made her hang on to breathe a while longer, it would have been to lay eyes on neighbors. Never did Jerry give a height about how many paces a panther skin stretched from tip to tip, or the points on the rack of a buck. All she cared about were humans. Back in Pennsylvania, she would sit quiet on her chair and ask Worth a world of questions about some family he met up with in the woods. Worth would scratch his head and answer the best he could, and all the time Jerry would sit there with her mouth rounded a little at what Worth didn't know. Give her 5 minutes with those folks, it said, and she would tell you more about them than Worth could take notice of from All Souls night to Martinmas. The young ones' tongues were loose enough now. Before they got to the top of the first hill, little Sully turned her face, smart and sharp as a young coon's, over her shoulder. "We got a winder light at our place," she yelled back at them, but when she had stood down there, she hadn't opened her mouth, neither she or any of the young ones. You might have thought they never had laid eyes on other white people. "Well, can't you say something to that boy?" Sayward had complained to Wyatt. Not that it did any good. All he and the stranger boy could do was scowl at each other over the ox's rump. She didn't know what they'd have done without that ox. She tried to scrape up some talk with the boy's pappy, but with a woman he was froze stiff as steel yards. Most of the time the Lucketts had to just stand there, first on one leg and then on the other, visiting with their eyes, waiting till a proper time had passed before they took their leave, saving their opinions till they got out of earshot. And when it went too long without a word, she or one of the girls would talk to that ox, running their hands down his soft neck. Oh, he was the most sociable one there, reaching out his snout for the fresh sassafras leaves they picked for him, and talking a soft deep in his gullet when they would neglect him. The beast's eyes were mild and patient as summer, but you could see a world of power lay in his thick neck and the wide flare of his horns. Now if it had a woman down there, Sayward thought, things might have been different. A woman would have been glad to see the girls and young ones out here across the Ohio. Such wouldn't have lacked for words to talk, bidding them sit down on a log, and maybe giving them a bite to eat to show them a hearty welcome. It would have been a comfort to look in a woman's face today and hear woman's talk, but it had to be enough just to know a second place in these dark woods was now marked with the sociable human slashes of the axe. Their own cabin didn't look so lonesome any more when they came back to it standing by itself under the trees. Worth heard about it from the young ones before he got in the house that afternoon. They told him all that had happened and some that hadn't, quarreling over how it was and wasn't. Supper done, he looked up at Sayward. "Don't he have a woman?" he wanted to know. "I didn't ask him," Sayward said shortly. Worth had a look on his face as he pushed back his stool. Most times Sayward could read her father's face like Jerry could a book, but this look she didn't recollect seeing on him before. Now what she wondered as she lay in her bed with Jenny that night did he have on his mind? One day not long after, she heard Sarge bark, and after a while the bass mumble of men's talk. When she went to the door, there sat their settler neighbor and Worth on the chopping log together. The ox they must have left down the river, but he and his boy had come up the foot trace mighty soon to see what the Luckett place looked like. And now that he was here, his hair stood up curly all over his head, like he was astonished with what he saw. It came over Sayward this must be Sunday, for his boots had been freshly charcoaled, and his linsey shirt was clean, though his neck and toe breeches looked like neither had seen water for a long time. His boy stood around like a lost sheep. Oh, Sayward told herself she would feed that man and boy well today, for they had no woman folks to look after them, like Worth and Wyatt had. She would pick those wild pigeons and bake a deep pigeon pie in the kettle. The 4 youngest ones could squeeze together on the bench at the trencher. She called Jenny to help. Jenny told her those freshly blacked boots made her feel half naked, and that's why she had stood off a little ways with her bare legs hid by the bushes. After dinner it rained, and the young ones had to stay in the cabin. The 2 men moved their stools back against the logs and filled the place with smoke from Worth's tobacco, telling where each hailed from in the old state, and how he had made his tracks through the woods. The neighbor called himself Mathis Cottle. He was a little fellow who sat up big as one should, who owned a cow and a mare back on his brother's place along the Yagahaney. But he was too full of twist and go to sit still long. His hands like those of a body with more pressing business on his mind, kept cutting on the floor little squares out of a stick from his pocket. And all the time Sayward could feel his bright black eyes watching her chore round the cabin as they had watched her bare legs that day down at his improvement. "Is her married?" he asked after a while. "Her," Worth repeated, a little surprised, looking at Jenny, who was fair-skinned like Jerry as a girl. "Her," little Mathis said, pointing his knife, blade foremost, at Sayward, and she felt a strange sensation as if that blade had painlessly pierced one of her strong breasts. Worth stared stupidly at his eldest daughter, and by his face she judged what he thought as if he had blurted it out, which he was like as not to do. He was beat out that here in this Northwest Territory, where men were scarcer than birds' teeth, a man with an ox, a mare, and a cow had looked on her for marriage. Now Sayward, he always said, was more like Jerry's sister, Beriah, who could throw any boy head over tin cup. The Conestoga settlement boys looked up to Beriah and told her their troubles, but when it came to walking home with a girl after meeting, it hadn't been Beriah. No, she could go home safe, alone, for no man or beast would dare molest her. The girls they saw home safe, bundled up with after, and stood up in front of the dominie or squire, within time were the cunning little wenches who held their ears shut when it thundered, and pressed close at the rattle of small vermin in the bushes. Once Worth had said he wondered if a strong-minded, hard-waisted girl like Beriah wasn't like the third sex of the bees that did all the work and were neither male nor female. "She's not married," he shook his head. "Is her promised?" "Not to my knowin'," Worth said. Little Mathis jumped up and went outside, where they could hear him priming himself with water from the gourd at the run. He came back in and tramped up and down, and it was plain when he started to talk he was full of words to tell. "Yesterday I says to myself, Mathis, do you need a yoke of oxen back here? I says, no, I got a ox. I says, do you need your mare and cart? I says, no, they ain't no roads back here for a mare and cart to go on. I says, Mathis, do you need your cow? I says, no, I ain't got a little bitty unwantin' mush and milk. I says, Mathis, do you need a woman back here? I says, by Jeems's cousin, that's what I need. I can't cut down all these year trees by myself. He flashed his eyes at Sayward, but she was listening to the rain on the roof, aware that her own sisters and brother sat in a row on the bench in the firelight, staring at her with respectful eyes. What the stranger boy thought she couldn't tell, for he stayed by himself in the chimney corner. Sometimes Worth Luckett was set in his ways as a pignut tree, and sometimes you could get no more out of him than an Indian, but it was plain that this was an unusual occasion, and not lightly to be set aside. A man for his oldest girl had never showed himself before, and might never again, anyhow not one with a cow, a mare, and an ox to his name. "You hear what he had to say, Saird?" he asked her. "Oh, I heard him all right," Sayward told him mildly. "Well, can't you say something? I hardly knows him yet. You don't need to live with him tonight." She gazed at her father curiously. "Oh, Pappy," she thought, "you might hate just a lick to see me go, for Jenny is mighty young to take over a cabin and cookin'." She tried not to read her father's mind too hard, for she would hate to think he had reasons of his own for wanting her married. A year and a half was mighty long time, she knew, for one like Worth to be fixed and settled in one place, but she wouldn't like to think that all that held him now, with Jerry under the ground, was having to get meat for his young ones' bellies, and skins to tan for their feet, and trade for their backs. If she had a man, it might change all that. He could off and forget to come home, and they would be all right. Never would they starve or go naked, for their married sister would take them in. He would be free as a bird to wander. He could see those far places they told about where the deer had strange black tails. He could skin the striped tiger cat and the queer mountain ram that some called the Big Horn. Even could he cross that far river they said was a river of flowing mud, and see those Indians with blue eyes and hair yellow as a panther's. And when he tired, he could rest in the Spanish settlements of the Illinois and listen to the women whose talk they said was like singing. Oh, he would console himself by telling in his mind what presents he would fetch them home from these foreign parts: a gold ring for Jenny's white finger, a comb carved from a turtle's back for Asha's black hair, a lump of blue gold to lay in Sully's small hand. Presents for all would he have in his hunting shirt when he came back, but it wasn't likely he would come back, Sayward thought, for some Spanish woman who sang when she talked would get him. "I heard you say," she said politely to little Mathis, "about a-goin' to the Youghiogany this fall, after your stock and fixin's. Hain't it some nice woman you know down yar?" "Oh, it has plenty down yar. I know a fine one, and her name's Maggie Bradley," he said. Sayward nodded at him. "Why don't you make her your lawful wife, and fetch her home with your stock and turnip seed? I'd like to see a nice woman away back here." Little Matthias looked at her but couldn't make her out. No, you could see he thought she held herself not good enough for a man with a cow, a mare, a cart, and an ox, when all her father had was a cabin with a paper window. It made him stand high as a little fellow could. When the rain slacked off, he and his boy went friendly home. They were hardly over the door log till Worth turned on Sayward. "What's got over you?" he grunted. She took down a gut of bear's oil to fry some dodgers for supper, for the company had eaten all the bread, waiting till little Matthias and his boy were plenty out of hearing. "I'm a-standing up with no Tom Thumb," she told him. "You mought not get another chance," Worth said. "He mought be the first," Sayward told him, "but I have a feelin' he ain't the last." She stood there mixing meal with meat scraps, a forbearing, independent figure, with the firelight playing on her long yellow braids and muscled legs. They were bare above the knees. Her father watched her through his brushy eyebrows. "Next time I go to Hugh's, I'll fetch you back goods for a new short gown. You're too old to be a-runnin' around any more like some young Injun with his backside stickin' out." He spoke gruffly, but Sayward could see the respect in his eyes. He meant it, she knew, but when he would remember there was no telling. So she pieced a hem on her clean short gown that week and went down to the river to wash. The river was the oldest road through the forest there was. Big yellow butterflies traveled it all day. Now and then slow green and gold gabby birds or some swift water birds flew up or down. The wind liked to use it too, but this day it was calm. The only ripple in this smooth stretch moved straight across where she stood. It was like a swimming stick, with its head sticking up, but she knew it was only a water snake. Getting tired of one side like Worth and coming over to the other. Well, she would send him back where he belonged. She waded in, driving a flock of water bugs in front of her, and stopped in some sandy shallows, fetched down by a run. Here it had 2 or 3 old water logs, on whose mossy top it was handy to lay your clean clothes and your gourd or soft soap. River foam had piled up in between the logs, dark brown behind and light in front. It would take a miller's bag to hold it all, but little Sully could hoist it to her back, and never know it was there. She pulled her dirty short gown over her head and laid it on the logs. Nothing could be pleasanter than to stand here without a stitch on and feel the sand come boiling up between your legs and the whole river pushing at you downstream. Bubbles rose. Some claimed they were the breath of catfish and lamprey eels in the mud, but Worth said it was the old earth herself breathing from some hollow place. The limbs covered her over here like a green roof. Down in the amber water she saw a picture of her naked body, shaking soft and delicate as a young tree in the spring wind. A porcupine nosed out of low leaves along the bank, and stood peering at her with its beady black eyes. "Go ahead and look all you like," she said to it. "I wouldn't trouble to duck myself from a porcupine." She tied her braids up over her head and scrubbed her body well with grease and sand, rinsing it off in the fresh current. Then for a while she stood to dry, inspecting with matter-of-fact criticalness her strong breast and hams. Yes, she was a woman now, she told herself, a white woman in this country of the men of the western waters. It was good enough being a woman. She didn't know as she'd change it now, had she the chance. Chapter 8. Settlement. Things were looking poorly in this Northwest Territory. Worth complained early next spring to Sayward. Yes, mighty poorly. A man had to be afraid of not making his lead and powder by another year. Only a little while back it was as fine and rich a country as a man could clap eyes on. Game was plenty as pigeons in the woods, Deer shed their horns within gunshot of your cabin. The Indians didn't trouble much, for most of them lived further north and west, and it had no white hunters nearer than the Forks. Then the government had to go and cut that full trace through the woods across the big bend of the Ohio. Worth had taken it for a kind of surveyor's line at first, for they let the trees lay where they fell. Now the Delawares told him white men and women from the old states were beating along this line, their mud sleds, carts, and once in a while a wagon, pitching like crazy over the logs, stumps, and rocks in the trace. You wouldn't expect, Worth said bitterly, these same whites had whole counties of new land left back in the old states, if they wanted something to break their backs on. No, they had to come out here. First the Cottles last spring, and the MacWhirters in the fall, and now the country was at the deal's door. For a trader, his bound boy, and a kind of runner, had come poling up the river with a boatload of goods, and plagued if they weren't fixing to start in the store trade where Indian Trace forded the river. I'll thank them none for that, he said. They'll draw more squatters than carrion can flies. Wyatt sat in a dark corner listening to his father. Not a word dare he say, but the news of a trading post right here along the river bobbed up like a float in his blood. His young back, stiff with import, pointed straight up to the roof, and gabble where his small pelts, skinned with Sayward's cabin knife, were. Oh, he had taken to the woods already like a young gad to wind and water. His hand could make snares and deadfalls shrewd as a man. Already he smelled so heavy of skunk that the girls complained of him sleeping with them up in the loft. Then tonight, of all times, didn't Sully have to shoot off her mouth about a thing she had been told in secret. This here trader got any knives, Pappy? She piped, innocent as all get out. Worth lifted his head and threw a look around. Who's a-needin' any knife? Wyatt, in his dark corner, would have liked to get his hands on that blabbing tyke of a sister. He'd tend to her in the loft tonight, yet if his father wouldn't hear. I didn't mean nothin', she whined. Which of them's lost your cabin knife? Worth demanded of Sayward. It's right up on the shelf, she said, placid as could be. His eyes retreated suspiciously into his 2 weeks' sprouts of beard, while Wyatt's eyes burned at his youngest sister. Oh, he wasn't finished with her yet. He would fix her in the brush tomorrow. When he woke up early next morning, she lay so small, warm, and helpless beside him. All his hate melted. He cared about nothing now, save how soon his father went to the woods again. For 3 days he sat around, still as a stone, but inside he had never been on such tenterhooks. If his father didn't clear out soon, he told himself, he'd have to push him. The trader might change his mind and go somewhere else before he could get there. He might sell out all he had, for Worth said some Shawnees passing on the trace had already stopped and looked over his stock. The morning Worth went after fresh meat. Wyatt watched every move he made. His father had hardly crossed the run till the boy was up throwing down his skins in the bushes. In the cabin he pulled on his hunting shirt, with the black squirrel trimming, and sopped his hair so that sandy cornshock of his would slick down. "Where you reckon you're a-goin'?" Sayward put to him. "I ain't a-goin' no place much," he said shortly. He didn't fool her for a minute. When he went out she took her work and sat on the door-sill with one eye on him, and he hung around fooling with Sarge a while, like he was in no hurry. The hound had aged fast the past year. Even the gunpowder Worth fed him sometimes wouldn't liven him any more. All winter he lay in the cabin, where he could feel the chimney heat. Now that it was getting to spring, he liked to lay outside, where he could smell the woods, though he was too blind and worn out to chase any more. Oh, that old hound was a gone Josie. There he made his bed under the eaves, where the ground was a little dry. His ears sore, his eyes filmed over with white, his coat gray-streaked, scabby, and bothered by flies. But he could still lift his head and wrinkle his nose when a fox or some other game passed between him and the river. "Come on, Sarge, come on," Wyatt coaxed him to climb stiffly to his legs and stagger down the path after him. If he took Sarge along a piece, Sayward had no way but to think he wasn't going far. Once he got the old hound down in the woods, he sneaked back for his skins. The dog was waiting for him when he got to the path again. He struggled up and started to come after. "Go back, Sarge, go on back," Wyatt mouthed at him. "You can't go along where I'm a-goin'." The last he saw of him, the old hound was standing in the path, holding up his head high like he did of late, trying to gaze after through his blind spots, the drooped tip of his tail moving just inches between his legs. It was a good thing he didn't take Sarge along, Wyatt told himself when he got there. An old hound wouldn't know how to act here, for he didn't himself right. He hardly knew the place when he saw it on ahead through the woods. Trees were down. A fattish boy, bigger than he was, and a black-bearded giant had started putting up a pair of cabins. Wyatt watched them a while from safe back in the bushes. Oh, this was a tony place for a young woodsy to visit. Out there in the clearing, a brush cabin had been set up first. This was the store. He could tell by the squaws sitting on the logs outside, while their near-naked young ones rolled and raced around. Every once in a while the squaws would yell at one for getting too close to a lunging beast tied to a log. It was a gaunt live wolf, with a slobbered rawhide muzzle on to keep him from biting his heavy strap through. The Indian dogs left off worrying the wolf to bark at Wyatt, and the squaws smiled broadly at him as he came up. Oh, they could tell the way he hung back. He had never done anything like this before, hadn't ever seen the inside of a store up to now, but he was going to see this one, with his back stiff as a poking stick. He went up to the brush door. Through the smoky gloom inside, he made out a white man in a leather apron, red and cunning as a fox. That must be the traitor, George Roebuck. Then he saw he would have to wait his turn, for a row of Shawnee men were ahead of him to try out this new trader's prices. Holding up his small pack of skins so all could see he had business here, the boy slipped inside. The Shawnees turned their heads. They made like they didn't see him. Down in Pennsylvania, the Indian looked up at a white boy like a dog would. Out here, the Indian looked down on you like you were the dog. These Shawnees sat big as king's men on that log, taking long, slow puffs on their gift tobacco. One with bare claws around his neck and scars all over his chest stood up with the post's yardstick. He'd point at something and the trader would tell him the price in skins. If the Indian bought it, he paid for it right out of his roll of furs before he went on to something else. But first he had to heft and feel of it a long time. Wyatt wished Sayward, Jenny, Asha, and Sully could see him here. Not that they ever would. Women folks couldn't walk in a post like a boy and stand with all the riches of the settlements piled up in front of them. Bars of bright new lead laid crosswise on powder kegs, red and green blankets, and black ones with a broad white stripe, that were the best, bolts of blue strouting and turkey red goods, new fussels that had hardly been shot off yet, Indian vermilion for the paint bags, wooden buckets of beads, of bells for leggings, of rings for the nose and finger, and a half-barrel that kept dripping from its tap in a wooden bowl, making the air sweet with whiskey. But what ran through the boy's blood like horses were those red tomahawks and shiny scalping knives stuck in a tree corner of the post. He had plenty time to look at them today. He stood first on one leg and then on the other, going out sometimes for a drink in the run or to put a tree between him and the squaws like a man. When old Bear Claws sat down, another stood up, and when the last sat down, the Shawnees started all over again, with their best furs they had saved out for whiskey. Oh, they knew better than to mix their trading and dram drinking. It was almost dark, and the post candles had been lighted when those Indians got done and cleared out. Wyatt pushed up. How much for one of them knives? He fetched out. Maybe he shouldn't have bothered the trader right now, for wrinkles had come between George Roebuck's eyes to hold his mind on the counting of his hairy gold. His lips moved as he laid out skins in piles: bear, beaver, otter, buck, doe, wolf, mink, red cross fox, fisher fox, and coon. His quill had to tally these first in his tanned leather account book. Then he held out a hand for Wyatt's scanty pack, looked the small skins over, threw them down behind him like they weren't worth putting in with the others, grunted and reached down a knife. From the trading, Wyatt figured he ought to have a couple coon or rat skins left over, but once he got that knife in his fingers, with its round bone handle and blade heavy enough to strike flint with. He wouldn't hurt the feelings of the traitor. Holding tight to that knife, he went out. The squaws had started fires, and by their light he saw the traitor's bound boy, with 2 Shawnee boys, laying for him outside the door. "I can knock you down and drag you out," the bound boy bragged at him. Wyatt stiffened. "You can't while I got this knife. Let me see it." Wyatt put it behind him. His young face had turned hard and cruel. His freckles looked like rusty iron. Oh, he wasn't big as this bound boy, but he'd go on his muscle before he'd let him touch his knife. The pair stood almost against each other, one scowling down and one scowling up, neither one giving way any more than 2 young bucks meeting in the path. The Shawnee boys watched, with their black eyes glittering. They would be spited if no hitch between the 2 white boys came out of this. The bound boy gave in first, for he was fattish and you could see he would be soft. "I'll swap you knives," he dared, stepping an inch to one side. Wyatt went on, the victor, without saying anything. He could hear the whiskey taking hold of the Shawnees now. Already they were whooping and carrying on around the fires, dancing and singing some Indian catch that was the same thing all the time. Old Bearclaws was drinking with the big black-bearded white runner, Jack Tench, and hollering over and over the only English he knew. Wyatt had to laugh, for it sounded like, "Dirty no good, button up your britches." Wyatt's moccasins moved slowly. His eyes took everything in. Never had he seen post-doings before, and it might be a good while till he saw them again. He had no need to go home just yet. He'd wait a while. He lay out behind a big felled butt and watched the squaws carry their men's knives, tomahawks, and guns to the woods to hide before harm was done. Those Shawnees were getting good and wild now. They even took the wolf they had tied to a log. They wanted to skin it and trade its green hide for more whiskey, but that wolf was too quick for tipsy Indians. It twisted half out of its muzzle, and bright red blood spat from a dull red arm. The squaws screeched and called down curses on it. They took limbs and wanted to beat and kill it, but the white runner held them back. He took one of their blankets and threw it over the wolf's head. Then he got some of the men to hold blanket and snarling beast fast while he started on the rear end with his knife. The squaws and young ones yelled like penny trumpets when they found out what that white man aimed to do. They roared at their tipsy men, trying to hold that lunging beast still, when one had to spit on his hands and grab dirt to hold a jerking leg that was smooth of hide or hair as a venison bone. The squaws doubled up with laughter. Not in any of his born days, Wyatt told himself, had he seen a thing like this. His own pap wasn't quicker or slicker with the knife. Jake Tench's hairy hand moved sure as death and never cut a hamstring. He peeled off the last of that pelt, shook off the blanket, and let the live beast run. The little crowd gave. No such wolf had ever been seen in these woods before, stark naked of skin or fur, It made Wyatt's hair stand up to see it go, like some red beast out of one of Sully's nightmares. It ran across the clearing, with the squaws and young ones screeching after. It staggered a little, as if with rum. It jumped over a log, half fell, heaved up in the air, and plopped out of sight in the run bush. And that was the last they saw of it. He wouldn't forget this easy, Wyatt told himself. He reckoned he had enough now. It was about time he went home. Away from the fires of the woods were black as a pit. He couldn't make out his hand before his face. Once his moccasins got wet. His feet helped keep him to the hard path. Hands and feet felt their way, through cold runs and wet places, through mud and over soft moss, around big butts and logs, through spice wood and hazel patches, down hollows and uphill again. Far off he heard wolves howl and some cat beast cry like a woman. Closer to him noises came and went in the bushes. He told himself he would be plenty scared if he didn't have a hunting knife. He could slash around with that knife worse than a panther with its claw. He could even lay a beast open in case he couldn't find, in the dark, a handy small butt to climb. On no account would he lose his wits and tramp all the way home through the woods like his Aunt Beriah did once, with only a tin lantern between her and a yellow panther keeping abreast of her through the bushes. He had no notion it was this far home. He felt he had walked half the night. He should have got to the cabin and back by this time. The path kept making strange turns, this way and that. When he listened, the sounds of river and frolic came from the wrong directions. Where he was now, he had no more idea than a lamprey eel in the mud, except that he was lost. Once he thought he saw a faint light winking ahead. It was too early for firebugs. When he walked, that light walked too, blinking in and out from behind the butts of the trees. Then he crossed a small run, and knew it was his pap's oiled paper window, with the firelight shining through, for he heard old Sarge whining a welcome from the path. Somebody pulled open the door. It was Jenny. All his sisters were still up this time of night. He stood back, for it did him good to see the long faces they pulled, thinking their only brother was still out in the woods. Then he stuck the knife in his belt and went in. "Wyatt!" little Sully cried at him. Never had she acted so glad to see him. Jenny stood back from the door to let him in. "You'd catch it if Pappy was home. I was just down to the post a-tradin' my skins." He turned so all could take in the knife in his belt. "Can I see it, Wyatt?" Sully shrilled. Asha and Jenny tried to get their hands on it first, but he took it out and shrewdly gave it to Sayward, who was eyeing him grimly. Her face didn't melt as she turned the knife over in her hands, feeling of the edge with her thumb as the others crowded around. "Is that all you got?" Asha jeered in her coarse boy's voice. "Ain't that enough for you?" Wyatt stiffened. Sayward handed the knife onto Jenny, the next oldest. Next time, she told Wyatt, "You better go a-tradin' with your pappy so you don't get skun." "I want skun," he denied heatedly. "And next time I ask you where you're goin'," she said to him, hard as could be, "you tell me. I don't want to set up half the night a-frettin' some painter gotcha." She was harsh, but he felt elated he had been fretted over. Sayward drove them all to bed now. She was glad enough. Wyatt was home. When she stepped outside, she could faintly hear voices of a frolic down at the post. Now and then the night air fetched them clearer. She wouldn't have minded laying eyes on that post her own self, though the traitor would not thank her to stick her head in. It was good enough, she felt, just to know they had humans closer around them. Her bed leaves felt more comfortable tonight. They weren't set out any more in these woods, only God Almighty knew how far. No, they had 2 improvements and a store around them. You might say they were living in a settlement now. She wished Jerry could have hung on long enough to see it.